The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, I'm Deb Valentine, and this is The Next Element. Tinkerbell, the Blue Fairy, the Tooth Fairy, Puck from A Midsummer Night's Dream. These are all mythical creatures that we've heard about through the millennia. Fairies have been around in story and legend for many, many years. Are they real? Do they walk among us? Here to enlighten us on the world of the Fae is Jen Kroll from Psychic Starlight. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Debbie.
Okay, so we're going to start real simply. Who are the Fae folk?
So, as we know, we've seen them show up in many various forms and places. The Fae folk are natural spirits coming from the nature world that work with the elements in nature. There's been many legends, particularly Celtic legends, really starting in Europe. The Fae folk are one that work with the elements of air, fire, water, and spirit. And earth, so they're keepers of the lands as well. So we know them to kind of be a little bit playful, a little bit fun, enchanting. They're very strong, powerful, manifesting beings. So they work with alchemy as well and magic.
Okay, so you said that they're spirits. So there's been some question whether they're fallen angels or whether they're spirits, but for the most part, we refer to they would be a spirit then?
Yes, most people would say like a spirit, just because they can take physical form, and they're also known as shapeshifters. So they can move into an animal form. Some have been known to, take human form as well, just with the energy of spirit. But really what we're saying is they're non-physical spirits that carry the energy of fairy.
Okay, so fairy tales and Disney have taught us that fairies are tiny beings with wings, and they're flitting around almost like a butterfly or a dragonfly. Is this an accurate representation? Just from what you said before, it seems like probably not.
It's a little Hollywood. But at the same time, yes, sometimes they do appear in that form. So what's really interesting about the Fae and Fae folk is that they appear to us in aligning with our vibration of what we need in the moment. So as helpers, nature spirits, if the cute little Tinkerbell is being called in, she has a special job to do, and she would come in that form. So there's various shapes and sizes and forms. It is very Hollywood to see them kind of all sparkly and pretty. Some, have different shapes and forms just like we do. So, they'll take on that, and whatever, however the human is relating to them, they will show in that sort of form.
Okay, so we have fairies, we have elves, we have pixies, sprites, imps. Are these all the same, or are they different, for lack of a better term, classes of fairy?
Yeah, and I would say different class is a really nice way to put it, because the elementals or the Fae folk, little people, they're often referred to as well. They all have various jobs, various purpose, just like we do. So they would come in different shapes and forms, and they would appear in different ways. A pixie has a different kind of job. They're actually quite busy looking after things. They like to clean up things and take care of things and make sure everything looks good. And then like the gnomes really are working in the earth. They like to dig up and pull up things and do a lot of that kind of thing. That's why we see a lot of the garden gnomes and all of these different, faces that we see are good representations of the different classes and different types of the fairies. Okay,
and where do they live?
Pretty much anywhere you would find, rocks, trees, water, they're nature bound. So they are really like close to lands, especially, sacred lands. As we know, in Ireland, there's a lot of tales about those stories. You'll see oftentimes a circle of rocks or a circle of hawthorn trees, and that's usually where the fairies kind of dwell, in those places.
So is that what is known as a fairy ring?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is one aspect of it, but there's also this really fascinating thing where the mushrooms will grow into a fairy ring because they're actually their own entity, their own being as well, the mushroom spirit. And they work with the Fae and the elementals. And underneath, they have this beautiful connection, and they pop up in a circle. So Some have said it's a good omen, some have said it's not such a good omen, but when that shows up on the land, that's the fairy ring that people are referring to.
Okay.
And that's where they dwell and gather and celebrate and party and have their little fun fairy lives.
Okay, it's interesting because I was recently at the cemetery to visit my mom and dad and with my son, and we were walking, we often walk around, and there was a ring of little blue flowers, and that's the first thing I thought of. I thought, oh my goodness, I said, that's a fairy ring.
Yes, exactly. And that's when they would be able to present themselves in the physical world. So we said spirit beings,
right.
Talk about the non-physical, but that's how they show us they're here with us, is those physical elements of building a ring, or sometimes you see trees in a circle, or rocks are sort of placed in a circle, different formations like that. They really love circle. That's kind of their energy that they work in. But yeah, that would have been set out in such a way because they are very closely related to the plants and the flowers as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It was very evident. Like it was almost perfect circle like this table. It was pretty fascinating to see.
Amazing.
Yeah. Are there good and bad fairies?
This is like, an ongoing discussion, I think, for many people. You've probably seen some of the signs where it's like, don't make the fairies angry, right? So yeah, a lot of people put those in their gardens. And it has been known that they have been mischievous. So what's interesting about fae is that they're actually kind of reflections of us. So there are helpers, there are messengers from spirit. They work with us, to bring magic into our lives, things that we want to manifest. If our intentions aren't so pure, sometimes we might get reflected back to us, not such a pure response. So this is where mischief kind of gets in. They're also very fierce protectors of their land, fierce protectors of their home, and their way of life. And so if that's being sort of messed with or altered in a non-natural way, they've been known to cause some mischief with certain things. And so that's what they are. They're little not little, they're, some are in little form, but they are offering us an opportunity to look at the way we behave as humans and how we interact with the earth and nature.
Okay, now I've read in certain, they've been fiction books, but that you have to have somebody, you have to have an introduction to them before they will interact with you. Is that true?
It is in some accounts. You can do this yourself. So anytime we enter into nature, we're building a relationship. So these are energies, these are entities, these are beings, so we're saying, hi, I'm Jen, I'd like to know you, and things like that. So you would introduce, and is it okay for me to come near the circle? You saw the circle of flowers. Is it okay for me to come, close? And, you ask for an invitation, you ask to be invited in, and sort of allow that connection to happen. So it's not like we're intruding, into somebody's strange house or something. We just don't walk into not some people maybe, just walk in. But that would be, the etiquette to communing with them would be hi, an introduction. And often it is nice to have a guide as well to introduce you to the realm because it feels so different in that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you interact with them? Is it, you and I are sitting here having a conversation. Are they going to have a conversation with us, or is it more of a psychic connection? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's just like we are communing. However, they use a holistic language, the language of spirit, which I say is holistic. So when tuning in as a medium or a psychic or using cards or any of that kind of thing, we're listening and learning in that holistic way. So we're using our 5 senses. So you might see fairy, you might see little sparkles of fairy or little bright lights. So that would be a visual connection. The hearing, sometimes they'll give you a taste. So you'd be really aware of your senses in order to communicate with them. So they might be saying words, or they may give you a knowingness, which is sort of like a psychic impression, that kind of sense of I just know, that clair, sentience feeling of I know something is being said to me, but you're maybe not hearing the exact words.
Right.
But you just have a feeling that that's what's being said.
Okay. And why would we want to interact with them?
for many reasons, as a child, I connected very young with the fairies, just from playing outside, and I could sense, that energy around. It brings us closer to nature. It brings us closer to that holistic place of being, our higher selves. They vibrate at such a high level that really helps uplift us. It helps us sort of manifest in this world that we're in. And so, that element of magic keeps the wanderer alive, keeps that childlike spirit. They often work with children, and that energy of keeping the wonder and enchantment of the world as well. Yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about the mischievousness a little earlier. So can you expand a little bit on that? Because I've heard sometimes it can be playful, sometimes it can be, I want to say nasty, but not so nice.
Yes, and yeah, exactly that. Like, there's been tales of children being removed. There's been tales of things not working out on a house that's being built or construction sites. My friends, I had the pleasure of going to Ireland and staying with my friend's dad there, and he told us, there's construction across the street. They haven't been able to build this place because their machines break or something goes wrong, like a bill's not passed or the equipment is breaking, because the fairies are protecting that particular part of the land and they don't want it to be disturbed because it's sacred. So there's been they'll interfere on things. So yeah, that's quite mischievous, and it can be. They're not necessarily meaning harm, but they're actually setting their boundary. This is not okay to treat the land this way. This is not okay to do this. So they can get quite mischievous in that respect.
Okay, and will the Fae folk also work with with animals?
Yes, so they're actually because they are shapeshifters. So you may have heard the tale of Morgan Le Fay, and if you haven't, she's often related to. She's a fairy, a Celtic fairy that brings crows, ravens, the rooks, right? So she will often send crow as messenger, and shapeshift into that. So they do work very closely with the animal kingdom as part of the elements as well.
Okay, and so some of the fairy tales that we all grew up with, for example, the Tooth Fairy. Do you have any idea about the origins of the Tooth Fairy and leaving money under a pillow for a lost tooth?
So it's interesting because fairy energy, or the Fae folk, so many tales have been told over time, and they really, really do work in that realm of our unconscious mind, of our subconscious. So anytime we're reading fairy tales, there's layers to a story that relate to our psyche and things like that. So the Tooth Fairy, you left an offering of money, and the Tooth Fairy, would leave that offering of money for you in exchange for a tooth. So there's this exchange that goes on. So the Tooth Fairy came about, taking the tooth and leaving the money. So this is we offer something to them anytime we're communing with the fairies or working in that realm. There's an offering, and then there's a give and take. So if we're wanting to work with them to manifest abundance in our life, we would offer gratitude, even love, or things like that, and that's how they would come in. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Jen, we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back and continue to explore the wonderful world of the Fae folk. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
I have a really big passion for dance. I get a little bit bullied at school, and I'm never gonna let anyone stop me.
You made new friends with us right here. I think that there are limitless possibilities to what we can achieve.
You are a star!
Your life will never be the same.
It was just breathtaking.
Live the life of your dreams, make it real.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Welcome back to The Next Element. I'm your host, Deb Valentine, and today we've got Jen Kroll from Psychic Starlight talking all about fairies. Welcome back, Jen. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about the mischievousness and all that, and I know that the Fae folk are found in numerous cultures. Mm-hmm. Are the belief systems radically different, or do they align?
For the most part, they align, and I think sometimes just culturally there's a little variation of things, but for the most part, they're actually pretty much the same. And the tales, if you had read some of the tales of the accounts of citizens that have encountered, Fae folk, across the country, across the planet, they're quite similar tales.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And now we talked about the fact that there's an offering, there's sort of a give and take. Mm-hmm. Are there any other rules of etiquette when dealing with the Fae?
I think being pure of heart, right? So you want to check in with yourself. You want to know that you're aligned. Of course, when you're doing any sort of interaction, you want to see where your intent is coming from. So because you're getting a response, the universal law of attraction, like attracts like. So you're getting a reflection back, what you're giving out. So anytime you're working with any spirit, you want to check in with yourself and see where you're at, and see how you're feeling, and just be aware of that before you enter into communing with or working with the Fae folk.
Okay. So I know you've brought us a couple of items here. So can you just tell us a little bit about them?
So the fairies, because of nature, really also work in the rock kingdom. So these are also spirits beings as well, which offer energy. So they work closely related with all the elements, including rocks, feathers, anything that you see of that nature. It kind of lets you know that fairies have been around as well. So they're working in the different elements, especially with water. You'll often see a lot of the undines are known, the fairies of the water. And so they work in those elements too. Working with the energy of the rock, you can also ask your fairy guide, and we all have our own fairy guides to, come, and they would let you know. I particularly picked this one, fluorite, for its beautiful properties of feeling that groundedness and connectedness with spirit. So it's sort of that combination of feeling grounded. It's got a water-like energy, and your fairies would work with you with those as well.
Okay. And what about the feather? What does that represent?
So the feather is a raven feather that I had found, and oftentimes raven will appear when fairies are near as well. So because he's a messenger, because sort of living in the in-between. So in between sort of spirit and here, and there's that beautiful space in between where they retrieve messages and bring them to us. So they often work very closely with fairies too. Any type of bird actually does, but raven has a lot of tail when you're looking into the Fae folk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you said that you started interacting with the fairies when you were very young. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So just randomly playing outside. I particularly remember one moment looking around at wildflowers, and they were dancing around, and a buttercup. I just sort of was watching it sway in the wind, and I heard this little tune, this little song, and fairies love music. That's another way that they also communicate. And I thought, that's interesting. And I just started talking to the flowers and the plants. Every day I went out, and the rocks and everything around me, and I would hear a response back. And I would sense that it was a little bit different from, just talking to somebody So it had a different energy to me, and I thought there must be more to this world than what I'm seeing here. And so I would have been about 5 or maybe about 4 or 5 around this time where I would encounter that, and I would see visions as well as fae folk would come forward in various shapes and sizes and beings, especially the unicorns. They're in their own kind of realm, but they also work in the same sort of energy as the fae. So they would appear often as well.
Okay, and when so you started this as a young child. So when did it become apparent to you, or how did it become apparent to you that you were able to tune into other realms, like the spirit realm? Because I mean, you're psychic as well, right?
Yes.
And are you a medium as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So interestingly enough is when I would talk to people and have discussions with people, adults, friends, they didn't see the same things that I did. And I thought that's interesting because it's so real to me, so natural to me to pick up on those things, but not everybody had. So I thought there must be something different that I'm picking up on, that not everybody around me has been picking up on. And then, my puppet passed when I was 8 years old. I was immediately connected to him as he passed that day, and I just continued a conversation. So I just learned just from experience that I heard and saw and felt things differently than others around me.
Oh, okay, interesting. And I think for most of us, we ignore a lot of those signs and don't really tune in.
Yes. And it's hard because it's a non-physical experience. So we don't have this tangible evidence, which we're seeing here, to say, oh, this is a rock. We have feelings, thoughts, things that stream through us. So it's really difficult to sort of say that's what that is. So we talk ourselves out of, no, that was just a funny thought.
Right. Okay.
Oh no, that was just a coincidence. That couldn't just be, actually happening.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, very true. we like to explain it and give it some logic.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, we really want to put a logic or a label on things, and the spirit world doesn't work in that realm. Yeah.
Neither do the fae, apparently.
No. Nope.
So, I mean, we talk about the realm of the fae or the world of the fae. Can we enter into that realm?
We can, and it all kind of happens simultaneously. I like to tell people it's like a radio station. Anytime you're communing with the fae, it's like you're tuning into their frequency, their vibration. And you're, always asking, permission, always, introducing yourself, just proper, polite etiquette. And anyone can tune in, but it's about allowing the response to come. Because we're really quick to try and talk ourselves out of it happening, leave space for a response. So it might take a little minute, before we start hearing the translation coming through, or sensing or feeling or having a sight or a picture or something like that. So it does take a little bit of time in between, but we can very much enter into that. And especially in those fairy circles that you're talking about, you'll really feel that energy, really strong in the fairy rings.
Okay, so if we see a fairy ring, do we just barge right in and go and sit in the middle of it?
That would be nice. I want to play in here. We would ask.
Okay.
We would say, and just sort of acknowledge what you're seeing and say who you are and ask if you're welcome in. And you'll feel a response. If it feels like, whoa, you feel like something pushing you back sort of energetically, not necessarily physically, but you might feel like a sort of pushing that's a resistance, that would be sort of a no thing, not now, kind of thing. And you would respect that, most people would, and maybe just observe from the outside.
Okay. And are there any, would you have any cautions for people when dealing with the fae?
Yeah, I would say just, be aware of how you're feeling. Before you enter any realm, be aware of how you're feeling. Because they vibrate at a different level than us, we feel it different physically. So it can drain our energy only because they vibrate so high. So they're vibrating at a different level, so it's taking more of our energy to connect there. So just be aware of how you're feeling. If you start feeling really drowsy or tired or something's coming up in that way, that's an indication maybe you've spent too much time in there. Maybe it's time to sort of pull back from where you are or how you're connecting at that time.
Okay. So when dealing with the fae, we talked about pixies and sprites, and are imps real?
They have been, there's tales about imps as well, yeah, and just the various different kinds of beings. There's so many tales, and I think, you know, humans really love to tell a tale, right? So that's how we get to know things, and they have been known to be around.
Okay, and are they more on the lower energy sort of scale?
I would say they work in a different, they work in a lower vibration. Yeah, so they tend to be a little bit more mischievous. Again, just like all of us, we have kind of our moods, our shades, right? So, you know, light and dark, you know. So there's some that work with some darker energies, some heavier energies. That's not necessarily a good or bad, you know, judgment. It's just there's some that help us deal with shadow stuff. And there's some that help us work in the light.
Okay, okay. And so, so just like, you know, some of the spirits that we deal with and some of the energies that we deal with when we're doing shadow work, then the Fae folk can also help us with that shadow work.
That's right, yeah.
And can you just tell us a little bit about what shadow work is?
Yeah, and so, you know, as a human, we go through many different things in life, different kinds of experiences, all unique to each of us. Some of us experience some traumas, you know, things that we're trying to work through, things that may have come up and that we find challenging, that we need to work through. Shadow work is really looking into those places that are hard to look at, really deep sort of cave moments where their trauma lives, where something has happened that's hurt us or we've experienced that's, you know, sort of damaged us in some sort of way. And shadow work or fears or things like that all lives in that kind of realm. So things that we find very challenging or hard to deal with, things that might bring triggers up, all of that it lives in the shadow realm.
Okay, so it's almost like a journey of self-discovery to work with the shadow realm. Okay.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Perfect. What is your favorite story about fairies or the Fae folk?
Oh, I think, well, I've always loved to hear, you know, William Shakespeare. I love to hear, you know, his depiction of Fae, and the poets also, you know, they tell beautiful stories of the nature spirits. You know, I'm akin to Tinkerbell. I do like her energy in the sense where she has this very, you know, she has a job. She's very focused. She knows what she wants, and, you know, she's been shown in so many different ways. But there's just, you know, I love the fairy godmothers. That's another realm, you know, the ones that come to help and are always kind of there for the children. Those are kind of my favorite places that I connect with the Fae.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so very light then.
Yes,
very,
I'm very much. But I do appreciate the shadow, and I have worked in that realm, the shadow Fae that come to just sort of reflect kind of what's going on behind the scenes that we might not be aware of, you know. And so it's nice to have those moments where you have that enlightenment, where you can see in the shadows and feel like you have that energy working with you too.
Okay, okay, perfect. Well, Jen, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm sure we could talk hours and hours about the different types of Fae. I'd like to look at the different cultures and just see what the differences are.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah, but thank you, and maybe we can have you back again sometime.
Thank you so much.
And to you, thank you so much for joining us on The Next Element. Until next time, love and light. Bye-bye.
Call the Rogers TV Viewer Response Line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
I have a really big passion for dance.